What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. The Blazing Vortex reveals just keep on coming, because today we're going to be discussing all of the brand new TCG exclusive cards we are going to be seeing in Blazing Vortex. Now, if you missed yesterday's video about the brand new War Rock archetype, you can go check that out. But today we're going to be talking about all of these standalone cards that we just got the remaining reveals from some of the other content creators. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I am super excited to take a look at these. And first up here, we have a card, Psychic Eraser Laser. First of all, sick name for a card, right? It's a normal spell card. It says send one monster your opponent controls that was special summoned from the extra deck to the graveyard. Then your opponent gains life points equal to the original attack or defense of that monster, whichever is higher. You can only activate one Psychic Eraser Laser per turn. Now, this card is incredible. And what's interesting about this is that this isn't an ultra or a secret rare, because you can tell by the lettered text. If it was ultra, this would be gold, and if it was secret, it would have like this sort of like silverish gradient to it. But this card could very well just be a super rare, or it could be a common. It's probably a super rare, let's be honest. But this is actually an extraordinarily powerful card. This is a card that actually allows you to out things that can't be targeted or can't be destroyed. So think of like Red Eye's Dark Dragoon. This is a way that you can just easily one-for-one out that. Yeah, obviously Dragoon has a built-in negation, but nonetheless, this is a way to just get rid of cards that are just very annoying to deal with otherwise. And yeah, your opponent may gain like 2,000-3,000 life points off of the exchange, but honestly, life points are a resource, and most of the time you're fighting for the board more than anything, and life points are kind of an afterthought most of the time. I actually think this is a very, very strong card. Now, will this necessarily see competitive play? It's going to depend, right? Because this is going to be fighting slots for other cards. When you compare this to something like Forbidden Droplet or something like, let's say, a Kaiju, there's arguments for and against using these other types of cards when you compare them to Psychic Eraser Laser, but this is the type of card design I want to see. I want to see more cards like this being released in these sets that are just generically applicable and give players more options for cards that they might want to consider, not stuff that's so narrow and so restrictive that you have to play in a specific archetype, or it's just a card that basically requires you to play a very specific way. I just really like the design of this card overall, and I really wish Konami would go back to making some more generic cards like this, because I think that would be more healthy for the game overall. Let's go ahead and take a step back though and see what is next, and I believe the next card is Underdog. Yes, so this is a continuous trap. This is a secret rare, as you can see here by this text. During your turn, negate the effects of all face-up monsters your opponent controls. During your opponent's turn, negate the effects of all face-up monsters you control. Okay, so this is a very interesting card, because during your turn, you're going to have free range, and you don't have to worry about your opponent activating any of their effects. Now, to be fair, it's only face-up monsters, so stuff in the graveyard's still going to trigger. Hand traps are still going to trigger as well, so your opponent can disrupt you that way. So this card is a little bit limiting in what it can actually do. However, if a majority of your opponent's threats are on the field, then Underdog is a way that it actually allows you to play through that and possibly clean up their board. Now, there's a big drawback to this card though, and that is the fact that the effect reciprocates when it is your opponent's turn, because this card is weird, because let's say you draw this card going first, you're going to set it face down for a turn. You're never going to activate this during your opponent's turn, because then that's going to make it negate everything on your field. So you need to wait a full turn cycle to go around before you can even use this to get the full benefit of it. Then during your turn, you can flip up Underdog, and you can basically play as if your opponent doesn't have any face-up effects on the field. But again, your opponent can still use graveyard effects. They can still stop you with hand traps, so it doesn't stop everything. And then again, even if you are actually able to play, unless you kill them on that turn, then Underdog's effect is going to work against you when it's your opponent's turn, and they can just as easily try to break your board on the crackback, because now you can't use any of the effects of monsters you have face up on the field. That may not matter depending on the type of deck that you're playing. If a majority of your negations are in the form of, let's say, trap cards, or let's say that your monster effects are in the hand, like Ash Blossom or Effect Veiler or just any other hand trap, then that may not matter to you. Maybe that's the type of deck this card belongs in. But again, similar to Psychic Eraser Laser, I really like how there's this card that really makes you think about what decks it could be played in, but it doesn't restrict you on the face surface level of the card itself in terms of where you would want to shove this in. People might find some ingenious ways to take advantage of this card. Maybe this card will make its way into the side deck for when the opponents just want that, one turn of just free access, and then once they can do that, they can just kill you because they can make something like, oh, I don't know, Access Code Talker, just as an example, and just win regardless. So it's interesting. It's very interesting. I think what holds us back the most is probably the fact that hand traps are in the format. I think that's probably the biggest problem here. But again, it's a card that makes you think, and it's a card that's actually strong, and you would want to find a way to make it work, and it's not a card that you would just immediately write off. So that's it for that tab. Let's go ahead and move over to some of the new ones here. Here we have Raging Storm Dragon Beaufort 9, I believe the name of this is. Yeah, definitely an interesting one. It's a ritual, so my hopes aren't too high here, but we'll see. You can ritual summon this card with Breath of Acclamation. That's a really cool card name. When an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, you can discard this card, negate that attack, and if you do, negate that monster's effects. Interesting. So this is like another one of those like ritual hand trap sort of cards. Think of like Saravis, the Ancient and Ascended, right? I don't know why Konami's on this trip of giving these ritual monsters like these hand trap sort of effects. I guess it's to make them like a little bit more ubiquitous, but it's just a little bit odd. In any case, as a quick effect, you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls, return both that monster and this card to the hand, and you can only use each effect of Raging Storm Dragon Beaufort 9 once per turn. This card's like fine. I mean, the fact that you have this sort of hand trap that basically will allow you to negate a monster's effects, but also can negate the attack of that attacking monster. What's interesting is that this doesn't target, so initially I think, well, why wouldn't you just want to play something such as Effect Veiler or Infinite Impermanence over this? This doesn't target, so there is a slight benefit to that. The fact that this doesn't target means it can hit things that have protection from targeting and the like, so there is a slight advantage to that, I suppose, but it does require your opponent to attack you as well, and so if they don't attack you, then that kind of just takes away from the validity of this card. So we have to see what the ritual spell is next, I suppose, and there it is, Breath of Acclamation. Really cool name. Normal spell. This card can be used to ritual summon any wind ritual monster. You must also tribute monsters from your hand or field whose total levels exactly equal the level of the ritual monster you ritual summon. So this is just your generic ritual monster. I guess it goes after all wind rituals. Again, I mean, I think if anything for right now, this card would just be primarily played for the fact that it is a somewhat like pseudo hand trap. I don't think people would actually be ritual summoning this. Although I don't know, you know, we're in a format with like Drytron and the like, so maybe Drytron will be able to make advantage of this. Who knows? Next up is a trap card, and that is Synchro Transmission. So during the main phase, immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon one synchro monster using monsters you control as material. During your main phase, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target a synchro monster in your graveyard, return it to the extra deck, then draw one card. You can only use each effect once per turn. So this is neat. This is a way for you to be able to synchro summon during the opponent's turn, so you could do something, just as an example, like Black Rose your opponent on their turn. That's kind of neat. It allows you to get some sort of effects during their turn, which allows you to do some kind of cute plays. And what I kind of like about this is that it has this graveyard effect, where not only do you get to shuffle one of those synchro monsters back into the extra deck, but you also get to draw a card, so it actually effectively replaces itself as long as you jump through the hoops to do that. There could be some cool plays with this. Again, it's a trap card that the only way you can really search this, aside from hard drawing it, is a card like Trap Trick, right? So if you're playing some sort of like synchro heavy deck, and then you also have to play Trap Trick just to get to Synchro Transmission, that doesn't seem like unrealistic, but it definitely seems like a lot of hoops to jump through. It's like a fine card, but it just has to be in a very specific deck to work. Moving on along, next up we have Pendulum Encore. So it looks like we got a Synchro Trap, now we're getting a Pendulum Trap. Oh boy. Normal Trap. During your opponent's main phase, you can discard a card. Immediately after this effect resolves, Pendulum summon a Pendulum monster or monsters. Also, for the rest of this turn after this card resolves, cards in your Pendulum zones cannot activate their effects and cannot be destroyed by your card effect. Also, shuffle them into the deck during the end phase. You can only activate one Pendulum Encore per turn. So yes, this is almost exactly like the Synchro Trap, except it's just for pendulum summoning, right? It doesn't have that graveyard ability where you get to draw a card, but honestly, if you're getting to pendulum summon on the opponent's turn, that's a little bit ridiculous. Now, there are some stipulations here. Again, you can't destroy your cards in the pendulum zones. They can't activate their effects. So that's obviously to bypass any sort of just crazy pendulum shenanigans that I know that these decks are capable of doing. So the question is, are you going to be able to pendulum something that's that's going to be worth it for you to want to play Pendulum Encore. This is actually searchable with Duelist Alliance because it is a Pendulum spell or trap, I believe. So if that's the case, that's a little bit easier to access than, say, something like going through the hoops with Trap Trick, because you already want to play Duelist Alliance in a majority of Pendulum-based decks just because it adds a layer of consistency. So that way you'd only have to play like a single copy of Encore, and then you can just search it with Alliance if you don't need to search anything else. And then that way it kind of just justifies you playing a lone copy instead of having to max out on it if you really want that consistency. But again, this is just another card for Pendulums that are going to make the Pendulum players think, is there a way that they can take advantage of this? I think that there is, and I'll be very curious to see what people come up with. And then moving down here, this isn't a TCG exclusive, but this is actually an import from the OCG. This is Virtual World Tutu. So this is one of the virtual world cards we didn't have yet, and that's because I believe it was a Shonen Jump promo in Japan, and so they're finally importing it here in the TCG. This card isn't really played, at least in the OCG variants of the deck. They might play like one of it, so I'll be curious to see if the TCG players decide to play it. But let's go ahead and continue on with some of the other exclusives here. Next is Steel Star Regulator. So this is a Link monster. It is a Link 3, and wow, those are some Link arrows, that's for sure. So it requires 3 non-Link monsters. Okay, so that's like pretty easy to get to, I would say. Obviously, when you have Link monsters, it's a little bit easier, but you do need 3 specifically, so that's kind of rough. It has 1,000 attack, gains attack equal to the combined original levels and ranks of all monsters used for its Link summon times 100. You can target one non-Link monster your opponent controls with attack less than or equal to this card, destroy it. Then if this card was Link summoned using an Xyz monster as material, inflict damage to your opponent equal to half the destroyed monster's original attack. You can only use this effect of Steel Star Regulator once per turn. The problem with this card that I see is that why would you just not make Nightmare Unicorn? Because Nightmare Unicorn is more generic. It actually is easier to make because you can make it with 2 monsters instead of specifically needing 3. Nightmare Unicorn actually has a higher base attack value, and it doesn't have the stipulation where you have to specifically go after a non-Link monster your opponent controls. You can go after any card, and additionally, it also doesn't destroy the card, it shuffles it away, which in most cases is way better. So I'm finding it difficult to see why you'd want to play Steel Star Regulator over something like Nightmare Unicorn. I suppose maybe the fact that it's a light, maybe the fact that it's a machine. There could be some reason. I guess it has 2 downward Link arrows where Nightmare Unicorn, I believe, only has 1. That could be a reason too. So again, it's very difficult to justify in my eyes. So maybe there's a use for this depending on the type of deck that you're playing. But I just think Unicorn kind of beats this card all around. So moving on along, we have, oh wow, this is a fusion monster. This is kind of interesting. Let's see. This is not in English. Okay, so I can't read this, but that artwork is sick. That is awesome. But let's go ahead and read what this card does. So it is Triphasic Deomon Cordius, a level 9 Dark Fiend fusion effect monster. I see level 9, I immediately think of True King of all Calamities, so let's see if there's any hope here. It's a 3,000 attack and defense body. It requires a Synchro monster, an Xyz monster, and a Link monster to fusion summon. Please tell me this just cheats itself out. That just seems absurd. Once while this fusion summon card is on the field, okay, there's no way to cheat this out, it seems. You can pay life points in multiples of 2,000 and apply one of these effects for every 2,000 life points paid. You can only apply each effect once. Add 1 spell or trap card from your graveyard to your hand. Destroy 3 cards your opponent controls, or this turn, this card gains attack equal to half the difference between your life points and your opponent's, and also your other monsters cannot attack. You can only use the effect once per turn. What is this card? Okay, so here's what I think of first. First of all, the fact that you need to commit a Synchro monster, an Xyz monster, and a Link monster, and let's not forget, you need a fusion spell to be able to summon this, because it's not like you just can contact fuse into this or anything. You need to commit that level of resources into this. This card should just automatically win you the game for that level of commitment. Yes, there are decks that can very easily spit out a Synchro, an Xyz, and a Link. I know there are, but the thing is, this card is just so underpowered for the amount of commitment. Like, let's look at the effects. Adding a spell or trap from your graveyard to your hand. Yeah, that's good. That's basically like Magician of Faith, let's be honest. You have destroyed 3 cards your opponent controls. it's sad to say that that's not really that good, because destroying cards is not great. Yeah, it doesn't target, I guess, but destroying is one of the worst keywords you could possibly have. And then this turn, this card gains attack equal to half the difference between yours and your opponent's life points. So, okay, so if for some reason your opponent's on like 4K or you're on 4K and the opponent's on 8K, then this thing will gain all the half the difference. I'm sorry. So it only gains 2,000 attack in that instance, which bumps it up to 5,000. And so great. Like, I guess if you're already winning the game, you could just potentially win. But the worst part about this is your other monsters can't attack. So I don't know. This is a weird, like, this is so unfortunate, because look how cool this artwork is. This artwork is badass, and I just don't think this card is that good. I feel like the card needed to have more blowout effects if you're going to commit to something like this. Like, why would you play this when you could play something like Zeus, and Zeus sends all cards on the field to the graveyard? Why play this when you can play something like Lightning Storm? Like, I just don't understand how, like, this is just so unfortunate, because for such a cool card, I feel like it's just overbalanced. I feel like this card's just never really going to see play, because why would you want to ever play this? It doesn't make any sense. Let's move on. Oh, it looks like there's a fusion. Maybe this is the fusion spell to summon it. Maybe I spoke too soon. Okay, so this is Greater Polymerization. A little bit blurry there, so I think I'm going to go back to the text here. But I love the throwback that it's like the original LOB Polymerization, and then they just put like a third guy in here. That's kind of funny. So let's get back to the text here. It's a normal spell card. Fusion summon one fusion monster from your extra deck using 3 or more monsters from your hand or field as fusion material, and if you do, it gains these effects. This card cannot be destroyed by card effects. If this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage. Okay, so at least there is a fusion card to help supplement summoning the big guy up here, but here's the problem with this. Yes, it makes him that he's unable to be destroyed by card effects. It makes him that he does piercing damage. That's not good enough. This card should have been able to supplement actually bringing him out to the field and making it easier to do so. What I'm happy about with this card existing is that it means that you could do something like with Predaplant Verte Anaconda, so you could do some sort of plays to get an Xyz and a Synchro onto the field, then like link into Anaconda. Anaconda can send Greater Polymerization, and then you can fuse the Synchro, the Xyz, and the Anaconda itself into this guy right here. But again, why would you do that? That's just like, the payoff is not there for this card whatsoever. It's weird now that we just have a card that can polymerization 3 monsters together, and it's actually kind of neat because it does give it a little bit of protection and a, you know, somewhat relevant ability, I suppose. But I feel like if you're going to play a card like this, or even design a card like this in the first place, this should have just said it cannot be targeted or destroyed by card effects. Like, it should have made it very difficult to out whatever you're going to summon to play this card, because of how conditional this card is. Or this card should have had this in general. Like, if there's ever a time, I know I'm vehemently against these sort of tower sort of cards that are invulnerable to everything, but if there is a time to make a towers sort of effect on a card, it's probably this, right? The amount of commitment and card advantage you have to dedicate to summon this is just absurd, and I just don't think that this is worth it at all. But I guess this is kind of cool. It's a neat little throwback, but I don't know. Again, it is what it is, right? So overall, when you look at the TCG exclusives as a whole, I would say probably the first 2 that we covered, which are actually 2 of the first ones that were revealed, were probably the most exciting, right? Psychic Eraser, Laser, as well as Underdog will probably see play to some degree. Even if it's just in the side deck, I think the cards actually do have a home in a myriad of different decks. But the rest of these, I don't know. I think there's still a lot of work to be done figuring out if there is any hope for them, and I'm not too optimistic about it because it kind of just is the complete opposite and juxtaposition of how I felt in the beginning, where I want them just to make generically powerful cards that a lot of decks can really take advantage of in unique ways, and it seems like the later we got into the video, the more obscure and niche these cards became, and they just didn't really seem like they were going to be viable in the slightest. Who knows? Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm sure you guys will let me know down in the comments because I'd really love to hear your thoughts. So thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video informative, consider supporting me on Patreon for exclusive early one-day access to both the history of Yu-Gi-Oh and the Yu-Gi-Oh progression series. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you next time.